Okay. I could just start with any questions that you guys might have. If you need a reminder of what we talked about last week.
Ernest,
Mhm,
could you go over the 5 breaths?
mhm.
I'd like to write it down because on my phone, whenever I'm watching this, it's very, very small and the whiteboard is almost non-existent to me,
Okay.
visually. So I would
Yeah,
like you to, if you can, go over the five
sure.
breaths so that I can write them down. And then aren't you going to um, give examples of how you use these breaths
We'll just do that at the
yourself?
same time then.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. hmm Okay, so uh I think the first thing to mention is that this is like a segment of the Four Directions training, right? So there's two major challenges, I think, in doing this practice in terms of elongating and maintaining voluntary attention. So I just want to make sure that I make that completely clear. Establish, elongate, and maintain one or more or mixing directions of attention between the four. So that's essentially a kind of narrowed down in a very nice, neat way what we're doing. And then it also, of course, makes it easier to remember so that it can actually be done. But there's two huge parts of the practice. They're challenges. Let's just keep it real. So challenge number one, and it's a challenge to what? A challenge to elongating and maintaining, not establishing. Establishing is most I think most people will get good at that pretty quickly. Would you and so establishing for a beginner is here I am in this mind, in this body. I have feet, I have hands. Okay. It could be right before a test. They're like, okay, like I'm going to do some tapping that I saw some guy on the internet do, and that's helping me to be present. I have established, oh yeah, Ernest was talking some shit about four directions, and there's my breath. Okay, that is helpful. Okay, that's kind of what the practice looks like in the beginning. Elongate and maintain, of course. Yeah, that's going to be more of a more of an issue. It's something that we haven't practiced. Remember, the Don Juan quote was, "You're essentially making yourself happy or miserable, but the amount of effort's the same." And but what he's also kind of alluding to is the momentum principle that the effort hasn't been just today, it has been over the last 40 years that we've accumulated the minds that we have. So doing something so foreign like breathing with awareness all day, that's like, it's not common, like you guys have pointed out. So first big challenge, redirection. That's how we interact with that challenge. The only way that I know, this is the only way I know, to elongate is the redirection technique. Is that point clear? Is that like as clear in your mind as it is in mine? Because that's like a really sharp point for me. Like I'm very clear on that point. Redirection is absolutely essential to elongation. And guess what? I mean, I have a nice little neat, comfortable way of redirecting what? Internal self-talk, because that's what we're talking about. Or, any type of response to stimuli that is either not benefiting you or you're starting to charge it with internal self-talk. Redirection technique is a biggie, but that's not warrior training necessarily. That's a super important part, but I had actually intended warrior training to pick up with the second big challenge, and that is learning to elongate and maintain attention on the breath. So does that make sense? Now that's the second big challenge. And maybe it's not a challenge for some folks. I don't know. I think it will be for most people though. Because again, principle based, we're not used to doing it. And then also how the human body is fundamentally wired. It's the way that it's fundamentally wired is also the path to freedom and that feeling of inner peace, which is what happens when we're aware of our breath more. The more we're aware of our breath, the more our mind is not at odds with the moment, especially with the other two directions. So that's also something that is implied. If we're talking about elongating and maintaining the breath, I have to assume that your redirection is pretty good and you have two directions. The first and the second direction are pretty active, internal and external. Does that make sense? That is all we're talking about, Nita. Yeah, while doing everything else. Yeah, that is the training. That is the totality of the training addresses that challenge. You know, the four directions in and of itself is looking to address that first challenge. Doing it within the five modes of the human form, if you will. So does that make sense where we're at? Okay. So now you can do any breath technique under the sun that you enjoy and that you find benefit. I think that's great. And this is another really important point that I hope is as clear in your mind as it is in mine. The breathing techniques that I'm offering is meant to be interstitial, meaning that it's designed in such a way that it can be done while doing everything else. Because one thing that I noticed in doing this is that if the breathing technique requires too much of degree of attention, because remember, this is to degrees, this is basic stuff. Internal, external breath and cognition, it's not always equal into all, you know. Sometimes you may want to put more degree of attention into your ears, physical attention on your body, plus the sound. Now you're linking two directions because you really want to hear something, like you're hearing into the distance for some reason that's important. Okay, so what we're doing with these particular breath techniques is we're doing something that doesn't have as high of a degree because we're being lighter with it. We're being more gentle with it. We're hoping at this point that we've been using breath as a part of our toolbox. I mean, right? Because we're talking about maintaining and elongating, not establishing. That's not warrior training. That's just basic training. So you should, and I know that you guys can establish and probably pretty good at elongating to a certain extent if you really want to. But maintain, that's what we're talking about. That's what this training will help with, hopefully. And then it will also hopefully help with cognition, because then that's the next one. That's the cultivation factor. I want to make sure every day that I cultivate a type of contentment, a type of appreciation for incarnation itself. And then everything else just kind of falls into place as long as I make sure that's firm. And so I do that right away. As soon as I wake up, it's instantly into the highest vision, longest reach, and I'm alive. So let's just go ahead and do what we can. When I'm talking, I focus on my throat. So I physically focus on the area of my throat when I'm talking, just like I physically focus on my ears when I'm listening. And when I'm reading, I physically focus on my eyeballs. And then if I really am looking to peer, if I'm really looking to focus personal power, I look specifically through my left eye because of what principle? Has nothing to do with the power of the left eye. You could do right if you wanted to. I don't care. It doesn't matter. You could alternate. The point is that the mind isn't used to doing it, and specificity adds to the intention and the will, which will therefore increase personal power and principle. So when I'm talking, I am paying attention to my throat. That's the physical area. The power of the left eye, or it can be the right. It doesn't have to be woo-woo, but the principle isn't, yeah, I get it. Okay, you're making fun of it. Okay, so yeah, that's the breath technique that I do primarily when I'm talking. And one of the things that I want to do is, and this has actually taken practice, is I don't know if you've noticed, but in general, I don't have a lot of filler speech. This is the way I talk. Like, this is the way that I talk to my friends. This is the way that I talk to, you know how, especially men, they can flip a switch. Like they can be talking to their mother and then talk to their child and then talk to their homie, like completely different. Just like, and I used to be able to do that as well. Do you hold shut the right eye? No, no, I don't. To an onlooker, they wouldn't be able to tell whatsoever that I'm focusing primarily through my left eye. And Donna, I'm sorry, whose iPhone? I made an assumption. My bad. Often somebody that I know. Oh, Santina. Okay, perfect. Yeah. No, 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 no. I don't hold shut this eye. It's more of just an attention thing, right? So you shouldn't be able to tell that I'm doing that. And I only do that when I sense danger, that because that's an intense type of focus, right, on my vision. And what is doing it? Specificity. I'm just being ultra specific. Remember, that's the principle. When you add specificity, your mind definitely isn't used to doing it. It requires more voluntary nature, more volition, more will. And then if you do it, you gain more personal power. The principle of personal power is intention and will. The more you intend and the more you align your power of will to that, the more you accumulate this thing that I have, this term that I have borrowed to describe something that every culture has a description of. So it's just the term that I use is personal power, because I think that Don Juan explains it perfectly. But other cultures do too. You know, I could look at it through the lens of Qi. We could definitely talk about it that way. In fact, I could also put it in the lens of the five elements and fundamental Chinese medicine theory, and also basic psychology. But anyway, so the idea is with that is more specificity, which is what we're doing with the breathing. But the idea with this breath is that you're ideally not foreign to your breath at this point. And so if this is just information to you because that's not where you are with the practice, cool. I mean, you can just take it under advisement. And I think that's fine. I'm not a huge fan of you're not ready for this information type of thing. Like I might sit in on an advanced class, understand nothing, but that information is still going in. So then as I learn, I might have more ahas because of the thing I was introduced to that was maybe over my head at the time. But the idea here is that you should be pretty familiar with your breathing. So now what we're doing is we want to breathe as gently as possible because of this principle of degrees of attention. If the degree of attention is too far into the breath direction, the other directions won't have the energy that they need for this to be balanced. Does that make sense? Balance is the principle. Unless you need to exist in an extreme for a short time for some reason, right? That might look like redirection. If you need to go into the breath direction as a part of your maybe something happened in your experience and you're like, hold up, I need to redirect, which shouldn't be a challenge to you at this point either. Remember, that's the first challenge. Warrior training addresses the second major challenge, which isn't redirection, it's maintaining the breath. Because I think that maintaining the breath is the clear path to stopping, in Don Juan's words, internal dialogue. And when we stop internal dialogue, big things start to occur. So that's That's a big focus because I want to cultivate. Again, you're not cultivating a damn thing if you don't currently feel it, right? So I could say that I'm cultivating inner peace, but if I'm a wreck and I'm all over the place and I'm an emotional roller coaster at this moment, I mean that's a-okay. That's how I'm presenting. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but under no means am I cultivating inner peace in that moment because it doesn't exist for me. That chemical soup, the potential for it's always there. Action potential for it is always there, but it's not currently being expressed. Therefore, it's not currently being cultivated. And I don't want to just talk shit to myself. I want to make sure that I'm doing something with my life experience. So I cultivate things. And I obviously that could change the human race to the nth degree. What if we just cultivated? Okay, I'll stay off of that track. Does that make sense? So why do we start with smooth breathing? Because it's a breath that isn't so far into the breath direction in terms of degree of intensity that it can be maintained. Does that make sense? It's smoother. You're not trying to change it too much. It's not reverse nostril breathing. You're not doing deep abdominal breathing. And I want to make one more important point clear. The fourth direction of attention should not be foreign to you at this point either. And what is my personal favorite and what I think the ancients have always used, and if Shayna is going back to old video footage, this is a consistency since 2016 or 17. But there's a consistent element in the fourth direction that I highly recommend. In fact, I insist at this point that you learn to utilize, and it shouldn't be foreign to you. What do you think that is? What is that element in the fourth direction that will help you elongate your breath? It will help you with it will help you connect all of your elements. It's the connection factor. It's one of the human elements. It's what makes us who we are. And hopefully you've been doing it all day today. I mean, if you're doing this practice, what is it? What's that direction? What's in that fourth direction that just links all this together? Oh, perfect, Ida. Ida went straight to it. Yeah, I was going to use that moment to take a drink, but Ida answered too quickly. I'm just going to take one. That's exactly right. So imagination at this point, superimposing your imagination at this point should be like, duh, like I know exactly what that is. I know exactly how to do that. I don't necessarily know how to maintain that. Like that takes more practice. Maybe even elongating it is a bit tricky, not quite there yet. But establishing an aspect of imagination as a part of your direction of attention techniques, you should be pretty familiar with that. If this particular portion of the training, warrior training, is really, where you're at with your practice. That second challenge of maintaining and elongating and maintaining attention on the breath. Okay, so smooth. Do we really need, okay, I won't give you the long definition of the smooth breath. I just want to emphasize that imagination is very likely a part of that. That's what helps make it smooth, I don't want to tell you how to do that. Everybody wants examples. They're like, tell me what to do. No, I've told you what to do in terms of I've set it up. Use your imagination with your breath in a smooth way. How do I do that? I imagine space, really, like I'm filling space with the breath. Granted, for me now, it is much more of a feeling as opposed to active imagination. It's more active feeling, which is also in the fourth direction, by the way. So I'm not hustling, I'm not skipping steps or anything. I'm still in the fourth direction. But the imagination is supposed to help lead to the feeling where you can just turn on that feeling. So I am being honest, like I can just feel in to what I call the bubble of, because I've created a bubble for myself where I fill it. I fill it with smooth breath. But I'll imagine it like so for example, the one that I do the most is for kidney yin deficiency. And I'm not going to get into what that is, but I want to breathe down kidney yin deficiency. And I also want to tonify my deficiency because it's deficiency. And you tonify deficiency, you build it up. So basically, I have clean water, it's okay, but I just don't have enough. So I need to get some more water in my cup. So I do and we'll talk about that tonifying breath. I do the tonifying breath in a smooth and relaxed way. And you could imagine that somebody is behind you and they have their hand on your ribs, like maybe 9, 10, 8, 9, 10th rib, maybe 11th rib. And you just kind of breathe into that. So I'm imagining that because that's actually not where I'm not certain there's any breathing muscles there really at all because it's my diaphragm. And then we've talked about the dynamics of breath. So it really is more so just imagination. Or as I told Shayna, I breathe into my cervical vertebra. And that sounds stupid to most people. Like most people would be like, that just sounds dumb. Like you don't have that has nothing to do with the breathing apparatus. I mean, maybe by extension, because the whole body's connected. You know, we could find a way that the cervical vertebra is a part of the breathing apparatus, but I imagine the breath going up into just this space between C7 and C1. One reason I do that is that Tai Chi type of thing. Like I want my neck to be straight, but also that's one of the ways that I prevent tension in my neck. So the best way for me to not have pain is to prevent it, and I prevent it with breath because I breathe smoothly into those areas. If I start to feel stagnation, I do that breath that I was talking about the other day where it's the sedate, it's the clear, it's the release. So if I have pain in my arm, I'm releasing that, and I release it on the exhale usually, or I'll do a combination of both. Tonify on the inhale, release on the exhale. So it's build up and energize on, well, not energize, that's not the right word. Build up on the inhale and then get rid of anything that you don't need on the exhale. Now, that kind of attention throughout the day is a bit tricky, so I tend to just focus on one or the other. And I'm imagining it. I'm imagining myself breathing into this part of my body. And then I have this, this newfound detailed explanation of the human body. So sometimes I even physically imagine the diaphragm and I physically imagine like the chi moving up. And then I can feel the chi moving. And then once I feel it, I'm usually pretty good. Then I don't really accumulate a lot of pain. There's not too much stagnation. I tend to move better and everything is flowing nicely.
If you don't have a medical background like you do, I would use my imagination to imagine the back of my throat is nice and wide and open when I breathe in. And also that my whole torso is expanding like a balloon and going in again. Just simple
Purple.
techniques like that.
Yep. Yep. So superimposing that imagination will help. But then ultimately, if the imagination feels like a reach, well, you can still feel into the smooth breath. Like you can still you've gotten used to physically feeling the breath moving through smoothly. Remember the finger over the nose test. How much can you feel the wind blowing on your finger? That's the smoothness. And then so imagination was the really important thing. There's one thing that is super important to Don Juan, and it took me forever to understand what the hell he was talking about. And I'm not so sure that I can explain it to you right now. But there is a word that that we use in our practice, and we're looking to align it with attention. And it's actually one way that you can translate in Chinese, yi. Attention, thought, or this word. What do you think that word is? We want to align our attention with our intention. Perfect. Intention is a really important word in Don Juan's world. And it is in ours too, except it's really hard to talk about. So we have to just work with it. And intention is everything, right? And we could say that intention is another way to say voluntary, intentional, intention. It has intention behind it. And boy, aren't we doing that? Aren't we aligning our intention and our attention, which is the sure path to will? Will just start to come, gravitate towards because of the alignment of the other two, in a manner of speaking. This is a way of looking at it. So we bring our intention and our attention together, and then now all of a sudden we have intention and will, and that helps us to build. And remember, personal power is just unobstruction. It's nothing fancy. It's just the intention of the universe flowing unobstructedly in and a part of and through. It's just everything is moving smoothly like it should. And that's personal power. That's the power that I'm talking about, not power over something. Deliberate is intention, right? Wouldn't you say that if you're doing something deliberate, it's intentional? Yeah, of course. So intention is a word that's behind everything that we talk about. We just don't always talk about it. So at this point, though, okay, so there's some things that we take for granted. One, this training is appropriate for where we are. If it's not, just take it under advisement. That's cool too. But if it is appropriate for where we are, then we're very familiar with imagination and we're very familiar with our own intention. Who here, and you don't have to put an X in chat, is familiar with their own intention? Have you become familiar with your own intention? But you don't have to put an X in chat. Okay, so if imagination is something you've become familiar with, if intention, that should have been a yes across the board. Because if you're doing this practice to any degree, that's intention. So, but ultimately, the idea is that the intention is something that you should be familiar with. And so now I can talk about these other aspects of the breathing. Because intention and imagination and smoothness are what is behind the other four aspects of the techniques. And the first one is one where you are basically energizing yourself. So I'm going to have to do this later, Ida, because I woke up late. I mean, super early, excuse me. I never wake up late. So I woke up super early and my mind immediately went to the digestive system because I'm studying for comps and I'm like, here we go. That's fine. I know why it's happening. I'm in an extreme. I signed up for this. It is probably going to lead to a small amount of suffering. I get it. Rumination is rumination. I am violating principle voluntarily. It's not so much cherry picking because I know that it's going to cause a type of suffering, namely spleen chi deficiency. So, but let's say that you wake up and you just don't have energy for whatever reason. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that your practice isn't pristine or whatever. It just means that you're a human being, and today is the day that you don't make huge decisions. You're just not. That's your yang energy. That's bringing energy up. That's energizing. How do you do it? With imagination, intention, and smoothness. Any questions? That's the yang breath. So you put that as energy up. That's all. Energy up. Moving, warming, energizing, vibrating. Things moving quicker. Does that make sense? Well, let's say that you got a big vacation coming up and you don't want to get excited a week early. That's a bit too early. And so with the smooth breath, intention, and imagination, you can breathe the energy down. Also feeling, that's a big one, but that's in the fourth direction. So I don't want to skip steps. But really, eventually, it's just the feeling. You can just feel all that down. Still highly intentional. None of that shit happens automatically or habitually. It's an act of volition. So there are going to be times throughout the day where smoothly, and now this isn't hyperventilating, like this isn't, I'm about to get my energy up because I'm going to have to hold my breath for 6 minutes underwater to help save somebody. No, or holding your breath to run into a fire to save a baby from a burning building. That's not the smooth breath I'm talking about, because you're not going to try to do that throughout the day. This is something that you would elongate and maybe maintain for a period of time because it benefits you to do. Does that make sense? So now you're using smooth breath, imagination, intention in a very intentional way. And that helps you throughout your day so that you're not just trying to be smooth with your breath all day. That's very nice if you don't leave the room. But you're probably a human being living a life, so you can apply these techniques throughout the day, and that can help you to elongate and maintain attention on the breath. And then I have, because there's no English word really for it. In fact, spell check doesn't even like it, but tonify is to build up. That is in my cup. There's nothing poisonous about my cup right now. It just doesn't have enough. And so when Dr. Jha was teaching me Qigong, and she's like, bring in fresh light and energy into your third eye, I felt stupid. That's not how I talk to myself. That's not my internal dialogue, but you know what? It worked. I breathed it in, I took in the light, and I felt fantastic. So I do that. I don't quite talk it to myself that way, but no harm, no foul. I learned that sometimes things work. Just give it a chance. And it really helped to allude to this idea that I can build up energy in my body. And now I'm not talking about energy in terms of like excitement and movement, because you can be very peaceful and calm and still tonify. Do you see the difference? That's a big difference. So you're not necessarily going to be in an excited state because you're doing this healing and building breath. You could say that you're building chi. You're not necessarily moving it faster. Does that make sense? Yang is faster. Is that cool? At least and it's smooth. And you do it in an elongated kind of way, right? You're not trying to build up the courage to jump off of the high dive. That's a different breath. I'm not talking about that. There's probably a video about that. A high diver, an Olympic high diver probably has a YouTube page with a YouTube video about how to do this particular breath technique to gain the courage and energy and what you need to jump off the high dive. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a smooth breathing technique with imagination and intention to help build up the breath in a healing way, as if you were adding some clean, fresh water to your clean glass. Does that make sense? Is that cool? And then sedate, again, there's not a great word for this in English, but it just means basically to clear. So we're human beings, and I'm not Buddha. If somebody litters, I don't like it. I'm not Buddha. I have a response. I'm not going to say anything, because I can redirect, and I'm not a child, but I don't like it. I'm not just going to see somebody throw a can on the ground and I'm just going to be like, I'm not there yet, not Buddha. So I'll quickly just be, redirect. It's also not this long drawn out redirection rule of three type of thing either. But it might be a kind of energy that I just want to get out. I just want to let it go into the ether. And I do that with my smooth breath. It's like, I shouldn't even make a sound so that you can hear it, because you shouldn't be able to hear it because it's smooth and it has a lot of imagination and intention and I'm just letting it go out. Like I'll let it go out in through my feet. You'll see me when I'm walking, I'll shake my hands sometimes just to get that energy out. That's clearing. Smooth. I can elongate that if I need to. I especially do sedating and clearing when I feel pain, because pain in Chinese medicine, all pain is stagnation. So if you feel pain, it is in some way qi is not flowing. Now there can be other things occurring as well that is the cause of the stagnation, but stagnation is the reason that we feel pain according to Chinese medicine. And it's just a way of talking about it. You know, we can also talk about pain from a more technical anatomical way, but we can also talk about it in this general sense. And it works very well both ways. Just depends. So if I feel pain because for whatever reason, maybe I just overdid it. You know, I took those water jugs up the stairs, and or I lifted Neo into the car. There's no good way to do that. He's a 97-pound dog, and we had to get him up and into the car from the vet, and there was just no proper way to lift, and my back didn't feel good, so I cleared it and I counterbalanced it, and it took some time. I had to elongate, and I had to do it smoothly. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to elongate. If it were more of an emergency technique, I can't elongate those. They require too much of my attention, too much of my energy, and then it makes it difficult to do anything else with the other directions. Does that make sense? So that's some examples. And I give you personal examples because, you know, picked up Neo, that shit hurt. I smoothly cleared the area. I imagine and I intend the pain to dissipate and to vibrate out. You know, how I'm doing that in my mind, I cannot replicate for you. I'm not even going to try. And at this point, if you're doing this practice, I shouldn't have to tell you how to use your imagination. Like you should have, and I mean, if you're coming from like a law of attraction, Abraham Hicks group, you know, there's some imagination there already. So we can engage that. Or other groups and types of training that involves imagination. Certain types of meditations, you know, you're going inside and you're imagining different things. That's cool too. You know, that's a way to practice, but you can't do that throughout the day. Do you see? That's another example. Formally meditating and imagining myself in this beach with, you know, I can smell the sea and hear the birds and hear the wind in the trees, and there's all of those sounds happening at once. And actually, I forgot what I was talking about because I just imagined myself there. I have no idea what I was talking about. I literally smelled the sea when I did that. Like, any questions? Because I don't know where I was going with any of that now. Oh, I can't do that all day. Right, yeah. Yeah, some techniques.
You were keeping the breath during exertion
Mm,
smooth.
yeah, and I can't do that all day is my point. So the techniques that I've offered here, the 5 ways of, and of course, the first one was just smooth. You know, that's just interstitial smoothness. You have to establish that first before you can do anything with it. You can't do something with the smooth breath if your breath isn't already smooth. And incidentally, Lauren, I also hope to do that when I'm talking. That's ideally what I'm doing with my breath. That's the main thing, is I want it to be smooth. But in terms of like language and speech, I want it to be highly specific and deliberate. I don't usually have filler speech. So if I drop the F bomb, I mean it. Like that's a significant part of my statement, as it was meant to be. I think when you use it more strategically, I just think it means so much more. Um, but it is definitely different than how people normally talk, especially in the Midwest, like where I live. There's a ton of filler speech. It's kids do it a lot. There's all these like little sayings and stuff. Talk more about stagnation. If is there any stagnation if you're doing your practice excluding pain? Well, you could have other types of stagnation. Yeah. Now, what What we would be potentially talking about is like emotional stagnation or even spiritual stagnation. And if I'm going to talk about that, I would talk about it through the lens of Chinese medicine because it's extremely organized and I don't have to try to reinvent that wheel. But I don't know if you want to hear all that. But to answer the question, there are other types of stagnation, yeah. But if you have not been able to clear the interference, we would just be talking about something that you can't perceive yourself. So there's no point. Does that, that's something really important though, right? Because that's the inconvenient truth though, is that we do have to clear the interference if we hope to really engage that cognition direction to the point where subtle can interact with subtle. That's actually a totally different kind of training that I have saved for everybody. Because I'm doing it now, you know, but I shouldn't talk too much about it. But it's another type of training that I think is just, you know, fun, interesting. People might like it. But yes, the answer is absolutely yes. So physical stagnation will be physical pain. Emotional stagnation will lead to emotional pain. And I don't want to sound judgy, which is why we don't talk about this too much. But there is a myriad of things that human beings do that damage the spirit. What do you think is the number one thing that we talk about in the Four Directions practice or in T? You know, we used to call it T. It's one of the most common and damaging things that you can do to the spirit. And it will cause stagnation and it will cause spiritual pain, which overthinking, gosh, that's such a good answer. That's not the one I was thinking of. Shayna got it right. And the way that Santina put it is also true. I would say that's a more warrior training of way of looking at it, thinking about yourself. In the beginning, we just look at getting down on ourselves. But then you start to learn that I don't even need to be thinking about myself all the time. So Santina, I would say that your answer is just a little bit more down the road in the practice, but is super important. But what Shayna said is at the beginning of the practice, because we got to get it, and it's what redirection is all about in the beginning. In the beginning, we have to redirect leaking power. Otherwise, this practice will never amount to anything because it can't. The principle of momentum applies whether I like it or not. By extension, Ida, you're absolutely right. That's exactly it. We're leaking power just by thinking about ourselves all the time. That's a form of slow leak of power, if you remember me talking about it that way. Remember, we had slow leaks and then we had like shotgun hole size leaks in the boat. So that is a form of you're going to cause, and Santina, if somebody does that, you're going to cause all forms of stagnation. You're going to cause emotional stagnation, which will lead to emotional pain. You'll cause spiritual stagnation, which will lead to spiritual pain. And you will cause physical stagnation that leads to physical pain. And the good news is that the medicine that I'm learning will help address all of those. That's why it's holistic. Does that make sense? That's a great question, though. I really like that question. Stagnation in other areas, absolutely. And it leads to pain, just like physical stagnation, emotional pain, spiritual pain. There's so many things that we do. Is stagnation another word for resistance? It depends on how you're using the word resistance. Because the way that I would use the word resistance, and it is important to functionally categorize and well, no, this isn't functional categorization, this is functional definition. So creating a functional context and definition so that we can communicate. For me, resistance feels like something that's more active, as if I am doing a push-up. Well, I am resisting gravity, but that's not just happening on its own. I'm choosing to do that. Or, you know, weights. There's a resistance and that builds the muscle, but that's not just occurring on its own. You know, I had to lift that heavy thing. So when I use the word resistance, I feel personally, and maybe this isn't how you use the word, so we can switch it up to, I would use the word interference. it is interference that causes the not smooth. What is the interference? It's typically going to be word-based cognition in your mind. Other forms of interference, habit. Other forms of interference, attachment. Other forms of interference, addiction. These are the primary forms of interference in the human experience. And then, so when I say, when the word resistance would be something more active, like I'm actively resisting this, and people do that, but I don't. Even when I see something about myself I don't like, there's no need to actively resist that. There's also no need to leak power, which would be to indulge it. Balance is the principle we're looking for. And that's actually something Don Juan, I don't think, always embodied, which is why, there's aspects to Don Juan that I really love, but I also think that there's some serious extremes occurring that I'm not interested in, because I think it violates principle. We can exist in extremes for a short time. We do it all the time, but we don't want to live there. Cheese is an extreme. And Americans, you're right, cheese is on everything. I don't know why. Why do we put cheese on everything? It doesn't make any sense. When I heard that people put cheese on apple pie, I was ready to just literally never look at any form of media ever again. And then they're like, no, trust me, it's good. And I'm like, maybe, but we didn't have to do that. There was no reason to put cheese on apple pie. I know, Jerry. Yeah, cheese is easy. Yeah, I like cheese. So I really like the word interference. And I think that is the word that we would use to communicate there, Santina. The things that interfere with our smoothness, because you don't have to create smooth. I'm in the body is intelligent camp. I'm that way with acupuncture. Sometimes acupuncturists, God bless their souls and bless their hearts, they want to fix you, and I get it. It's fine. I don't look at it that way. I don't look like I'm trying to fix you. I think I'm just trying to be another tool in your toolbox to help your body intelligently do what it needs to do. I don't tell it what it needs to do. You don't tell it what it needs to do. We just create the space necessary, because you didn't tell it what it needed to do when you were born. And your body did some pretty amazing shit from birth to 2 to 4 to 5 years old. And you didn't have to tell it to do any of that. Some of the most amazing things that you've ever done in your entire life, you didn't have to tell yourself to do. You just did it. So do we have any questions about the breath and where we are with the breathing? And then I have just one more little topic that I wanted to talk about while we're all here. Redirection. So with redirection, it's a there is no image of perfection. I have never met Buddha. I don't ever intend to put an enlightenment shingle on my house. I don't ever intend to use the word master. Just not into that shit. Like, it's fine. It's just ways to describe stuff, I guess. I will use the moniker doctor in association to acupuncture only, or Chinese medicine stuff. And then when I have a PhD, then I'll use it for that stuff. But I'm not a big fan of like unnecessary titles. So we'll always probably need to redirect, even to the extent that we did when we first started this practice. When my dog, I like to use my dog because he's, I really care about my dog, but he's also not, I'm not going to use, obviously Shayna, Kobe, any of you as an example. And I know you all love your pets, so you get it, right? I'm going to need to redirect using the rule of 3, just like I did on day 1. Am I going to go into the depths of emotional turmoil? Probably not. because I have this practice, right? And it does help me a lot. But I'm not, so the bottom line is I just want to make sure that there's no guru, master, illusion, BS, because I don't like it at all. I almost used the word hate there. You heard me. I don't like it. It's icky, and it makes me feel gross. So redirection is always going to be a part of my practice. I'll be 110 years old, and if the stimuli causes the response, I will redirect. And I'm not going to get down on myself. I'm not going to be like, oh my gosh, I should have been Buddha by now. No, I'm just going to do the damn thing because I care about my life more than I care about being some imaginary image of perfection. That just weighs me down. That just creates a multiplicity that doesn't even actually exist outside of my brain. So redirection is really important. And we have a week coming up for a lot of people that we need to really be careful of our own minds. And I'm saying this because I need to as well. And so we have the traps of thinking. And I think that there's a trap that we don't talk about. And I don't think it is really included. And I'm looking it over and I don't think so. Let me go back to it. I think we're missing one. Not the enemies of knowledge.
Yeah, it's psychological time.
No, I think there's one that we're not talking about enough. Let me see. Let me make sure it's not this already, though. I could say that it's a form of that. All right. So I'm going to list. In the beginning, we oversimplify it because it needs to be easy enough to do. Because just like Donna has pointed out, we may want to convince ourselves that we need to think of everything. Like we got to think to raise our hand. And I mean words in our mind. Like we need words in our mind to raise our hand. We need words in our mind to go to the bathroom. We need words in our mind to solve a problem. We need words in our mind to have a romantic experience. And then we realize, oh, wait, no, we don't. Okay. So now what? So the beginning, the rule of three is still, everything else will still be a branch of that somehow. Right? So this is the more of the categorical, the functional category, and then the traps of thinking. But these three are a trap as well. So it's like, start with these three. That's enough. That's enough for you to narrow down at all. But as we practice more and we interact with our life more, we do actually flesh this out just a little bit. So it's just a little bit more clear. And I call that the traps of thinking. Does that make sense? Does that help clarify how I'm interacting with this? Doesn't change anything that we used to do. It's actually the same. So yeah, the rule of three is a part of those traps of thinking, but you only need the first three. Those are the essential amino acids to the protein. The rest, the body makes on its own. But those are still super important. And so that there's a certain time, like especially when we start talking about leaking power, let's make sure that we're looking at this in a little bit more detail. But of course, we start with repetitive. I probably spelled that wrong, but habitual. And I don't say not making me feel well anymore because that's very abstract. So it's more directional. And really the best way is it leading towards inspiration? Is it leading back to my practice? But then we can get a little bit more detailed. And I'll just keep them in order that Shana has them here. So this one is common. And we could talk about any of these individually. And I'm going to add this one because it's really close to comparing and contrasting, but since we're just being a little bit more detailed with things. Such a trap. Um, Oreos. And then, last but certainly not least. Okay, so chances are, if you have a goal, anything that you want to do in life, all of this will waste your time. So
Are you doing it on a whiteboard?
no, I just put it in chat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just did a 1 through 9. And this might change. We might change the wording. We might add a 10. We might take, whatever but this is a good start. Like, this is a really good way to say, okay, first of all, like at this point in our practice, we're talking about warrior training. We're talking about maintaining, elongating and maintaining breath, which implies that you have the first and second direction active. And you're probably linking the two. You're probably linking them all. Remember, I use my imagination to breathe into my bubble of perception. That's all 4 directions of attention kind of linked together. Yeah, I've added a couple. The one is like next to comparing and contrasting is trying to be right, like wanting to be right. That's a trap, especially when somebody hasn't asked. That's a big one. Thinking about our wants and desires. You already know what you want. Who are you talking to? Like, it's not new. It's just a complete waste of energy. Imaginary scenarios. There are ways that you can meditate, and I think that's perfectly appropriate. But what I'm talking about is below the threshold of active recognition. We are starting to imagine scenarios, and it's not voluntary. We didn't give it our permission. They're just coming up. And then, of course, one of the biggest traps of all is thinking about the past. And then, of course, one of the imaginary scenarios are potentially the future. Wait. Nope, there has to be this one too. Oh gosh. Yep. Holy shoot. Yes. Let's add that. Just thinking about your damn self all the time. Self and other. Yeah. That's probably the one that I was actually trying to think of, because other was coming, but self and other. So let's just, Shayna, let's jot those down for now. And let's just stop there. That's plenty. And all of that is going to be repetitive, habitual, and not making you feel well. Do you see what I mean? So that's the ultimate gauge, but yeah. Minus the word firm, I will put the list so that we can save. But I would rather put the list in. I like everything to be subject to change. But and that's why I'm not going to number it. It's not the 11 yada yadas. But, we do have some traps of thinking that we can talk about. And I think that these 11 are a great start, if not a concise list. Any questions about any of these and how you would apply the rule of 3 or why they're there? If you have your first 2 directions of attention, what do I guarantee with this practice? And I don't like the word guarantee often, but what do I guarantee? If you can elongate, it's more elongate and maintain 2 directions of attention, what do I guarantee? That's it. Although I like that term. That is one of my favorite terms. I would say that's the next one. I think the breath really helps to create that even. But we're talking about what's the first one do? Well, again, you skip into the third one. That's breath. What's the first two? Is that the first one, Shane? Because there's a better word than focus. Okay. I'm gonna go to the whiteboard. Shana got it. Yeah, finally. Okay, new whiteboard. This is really important. Everything else will come from this and we can talk about it. Oh no, I don't like that whiteboard. Sorry. I like plastic. The bicycle I use is called a classic bicycle now. That's how I know I'm old. And I'm so old that I prefer the classic whiteboard. It's classic now. It's all downhill from here. That's a joke. That's not peaking power. So the first one that I guarantee, with elongating and maintaining at least one direction of attention as often as you can remember throughout the day, you will improve your concentration. And of course, yes, that's focus, that's attention, that's and you can stop there, and then you're just going to learn how to concentrate better. And if you are somebody that maybe you are working with attention issues, it would still help. To what degree? I don't know. More research is necessary, but I still think it will help to some degree. It can't hurt. So it will improve your concentration. Now, if we can start to get an internal and an external point of attention active, and we can start to elongate and maintain 2 points of attention, we become more aware of ourselves in space and time as we exist. And it's at that point that we really reach that first difficulty, one of the first major difficulties. Because now we have the self-awareness to properly redirect. I don't know the redirection challenge, but we'll call it the redirection hill. Because you got to climb it. And this is kind of where are we now? And then we're on 3, that if we can learn to maintain the breath, we will no longer be at odds with ourselves or the world around us. You can't. If you're maintaining your internal, external, and breath, no, you're not at odds with yourself for the moment. How can you be? By definition, you're not. If I were to say at odds with the present moment means that you're not paying attention to it. Do we agree? And you're probably thinking in your head, in words in your mind, probably, but at least do we agree on that? So if we do have our first 2 points of attention and we're able to elongate and maintain first directions, and we're in our warrior training and we're working on our breathing, but now the fourth thing, which Ida kind of jumped straight to one of the fourth things. But we could say that that's the space, the mind space. Let's use that word since that's the way Ida talked about it. That's the mind space. And in this mind space, the practice will focus on the C word. Do you like the law of attraction? Who here likes the law of attraction? Cultivation. Who likes the ideas behind the law of attraction and thinks that that's a pretty good idea? At least to some extent. Maybe not the way that people interpret the law of attraction, but just in terms of what you understand about the law of attraction. I do too. But the only way that I understand the law of attraction is with this fourth element. Isn't that what Abraham Hicks is always talking about? Feel it. You have to feel it. That's what I'm talking about. That's what this is. That's what the mind space does. That's how you feel it. That's what cultivation is. That's what I'm doing all day. That's why it leads to the conscious creation. That's why it's deliberate. That's why everything that you look around and you see, you have put there. Does that make sense? Like, what are you cultivating? Well, take that thing, that the high flying disc or whatever, that's what you're cultivating. Probably not the high flying disc, because that's probably an extreme, and cultivating an extreme is probably going to lead to cherry picking, because it would be existing in an extreme and thinking it won't lead to, or knowing it will and just doing it anyway. Suffering, lead to suffering, pain. Lemon cookies sound good. All right, any questions about any of that? The breaths, I'm not going to tell you what to imagine. I'm not going to tell you, like, I've given categories. I don't want to tell people exactly what to do, because that gets, I just said, this doesn't make sense to me. That feels like a violation of principle. So, I know that with a lot of practices, they're like, this is exactly how you do it. I can't quite do it that way. I have to more give you categories, give you examples, and then kind of let you fill them on your own. Such as those categories with the breathing. And if you're able to redirect any of those traps of thinking, especially before they gain momentum, you can maintain focus. Focus on what? Probably focus on cultivating, if that's where you are in the practice, which is what we'll talk about next in warrior training. But let's keep going with the breath, and the idea is that you really start to focus on cultivation only after you're able to really embody the breath, because you need that anchor, and you want to be careful that you're not going to end up hustling yourself or coasting. Any questions, comments, or concerns before we finish up? That's all I have to talk about. I think at some point we'll do like individual videos, or just individual lessons, or maybe even like one longer one about those traps of thinking and why they're traps. Should be pretty obvious to this group though. Oh, good. Okay. So 4 directions of attention. We're looking to establish, elongate, and maintain. Internal, external, breath, and cognition. Also, combine them. Breathe into your environment. The bubble of perception is what I call it. But breathe into the environment. Imagine that type of interaction and connection. You can connect these directions. They don't have to exist as isolated little things. And then eventually, in the cognition direction is the state of being, or even maybe the emotion. I think the emotion eventually will lead to state of being. You will prefer to cultivate state of being over just the emotion, because the state of being includes the emotion. The emotion doesn't automatically include the state of being, because the emotional component is separate from the energetic component, the spiritual component, the ethereal component. Separate, but not separate, but you get what I mean. Yeah. All right, cool. Well, we'll be back. I don't think we have anything again until Thursday. And then Thursday's the group study. And then we're going to probably do another little series. We're just deciding which ones to do first. Maybe the traps of thinking, maybe something like that would make for a good series. There's all kinds of things actually that we still need to talk about. Still need to talk about leaking power, still need to talk about segmenting, still need to talk about productive self-dialogue. There's still probably a lot of room to clarify the redirection technique for people. So still lots of stuff to talk about, but hopefully this is helpful for your practice today and going into the week, because for Americans at least, it's going to be a very tumultuous week around us. So hopefully we have enough tools to adapt. Yep, 8 a.m. and 5:30. All right, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, you can just send me a message, or you can just bring them to the group study and we can talk about them there. But thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time. All right.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, bye everybody. Thank you. Watch out for those traps of thinking.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bye.